Arun was a soldier, trained for long patrols and sudden danger. For weeks he had been moving across empty star routes in a small scout craft. His mission was simple: to watch the borders and make sure no hidden enemy passed through. The days had been quiet, only the sound of the engines and the flicker of lights on his control board keeping him company. He was used to silence, but on this day the silence broke in a violent way. The first sign of trouble was a faint tremor in the ship. Arun leaned forward and checked the screen. A wave of rocks drifted ahead, moving fast. At first he thought he could steer around them, but then the ship jolted hard. A sudden impact made the metal walls shake. His hands gripped the controls, trying to guide the ship clear, but another strike came, louder than before. The warning lights flashed red, and smoke filled the cabin. Arun tried every system, but the ship was falling. The engines lost power, the alarms screamed, and the stars outside spun like fireflies. His heart beat fast, yet his training held him steady. He scanned for a safe place to land, but there was no time. Through the window he saw a world below, green with forests and shining rivers. He pulled the crash lever and braced for impact. The ship broke through the upper sky with a roar. The heat burned around the hull, and pieces of metal tore away. Arun fought the controls, guiding the craft toward a wide clearing. The ground rushed up. With a heavy crash the ship struck the soil, bouncing once before sliding into the edge of tall trees. Branches snapped, dirt sprayed, and then silence returned. For a long moment Arun sat still. His ears rang, his chest rose and fell, and every part of his body ached. Slowly, he unfastened his belt and pulled himself up. The cabin was broken, the panels dark, and sparks danced across the walls. He found his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and forced open the door. The air outside was cool and heavy with the smell of leaves. He stumbled out and felt the ground beneath his boots. The forest around him was alive. Strange birds called from the branches, and the light of two suns filtered through the leaves. Arun tightened his grip on his pack and scanned for movement. His training told him never to stand still after a crash. He needed shelter, water, and above all, safety. Ahead, through the trees, he saw something unusual. Rising above the forest was a tall structure, bright as polished stone, shaped with towers that caught the sunlight. It was a palace, though at first he did not believe his eyes. The building looked like it had grown from the earth itself, with wide stairways and shining walls. Arun hesitated. A place like this meant people, and people could mean help. It could also mean danger. But his ship was gone, and he had no other choice. He walked forward, each step careful on the uneven ground. The closer he came, the more he realized how vast the palace was. Its gates stood tall, carved with patterns he could not understand. Guards in silver armor stood watch, their spears glowing faintly in the sun. Arun stepped out from the trees and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. The guards moved at once, blocking his path. Their faces were sharp, their eyes bright, and their movements precise. One guard barked words in a language Arun did not know. He shook his head, pointing back toward the forest, then to his broken ship. He touched his chest and bowed his head, showing he was only a traveler. The guards did not lower their weapons, but one turned and spoke through a small device at her wrist. After a tense pause, the gates began to open. Inside the gates, the air was calm and filled with the scent of flowers. Arun was led across a wide courtyard lined with statues of warriors. His boots echoed against the stone floor as he was pushed forward. At the end of the courtyard stood a throne, and upon it sat a woman dressed in flowing white and silver robes. Her face was calm, her gaze steady, and the hall fell silent as she raised her hand. Arun realized at once who she must be. This was no ordinary woman. She was a leader, an empress, and every eye in the hall waited for her to speak. He lowered himself to one knee, though he did not know their customs. The empress looked at him, her expression unreadable. This was not how she had expected her day to begin. She had been preparing for a rare ceremonial meeting, a blind date with a suitor chosen by her council. Instead, before her now stood a wounded soldier from the stars, who had stumbled into her hall by chance. The guards waited for her order, unsure whether to strike or spare him. The daughters of the empress, who stood near her throne, whispered among themselves, curious and watchful. The empress lifted her hand once more, and silence filled the chamber. Arun felt the weight of her gaze, and though his body ached from the crash, he stood tall. He had no idea that his arrival had just changed the course of more than his own life. The throne room was silent. The guards stood ready with their spears, and the daughters of the empress watched the soldier with sharp eyes. The man from the sky seemed tired and injured, but there was no fear in his face. His uniform was torn, dust clung to his arms, and a streak of dried blood marked his forehead. Yet he stood tall before the throne, waiting for judgment. The empress was called Lyra by her people. She was known as the Quiet Empress, for she rarely spoke more than a few words. She ruled not through loud commands but through presence and calm authority. Even now, when every person in the hall waited for her voice, she said nothing at first. She studied the man before her with eyes that seemed to see deeper than the surface. Arun felt the weight of her gaze. He did not know her language, and she did not know his. Still, something in her expression told him she understood more than words could explain. He bowed his head, lowering one knee again. The gesture made the guards relax slightly, though their spears did not lower. Finally, the empress raised her hand and spoke softly. Her words flowed like water, gentle but firm. One of the daughters stepped forward and translated in a voice strong and clear. You are not the one who was called to meet her. Who are you, stranger, and why do you enter this place? Arun pointed to himself. Arun, he said simply, his name firm in the air. Then he stretched his arm toward the broken ship visible beyond the trees, and he made the sound of crashing. His hands spread wide like wings, then dropped quickly, ending with his palm striking the stone floor. The daughters exchanged looks, whispering to one another. They understood enough. He was not a suitor but a soldier who had fallen from the sky. The empress listened without moving. Her hands rested lightly on the arms of her throne, and her eyes did not waver. She spoke again, her tone as steady as the still surface of a deep lake. The daughter repeated her words. A soldier from the stars has fallen at our gate. This is rare. Perhaps it is fate that brought him here. He shall not be harmed. The guards lowered their spears at once, though their eyes remained wary. Arun breathed easier, though his heart stayed tense. He had walked into a place he could not understand, yet the ruler had given him mercy. He bowed again, pressing his fist lightly against his chest as a sign of respect. The 6 daughters of the empress stood in a row near her throne. Each one carried the air of a warrior, tall and straight, their armor shaped with symbols of their house. Their faces were different, but each showed strength and discipline. The eldest spoke first. Her voice was calm but edged with challenge. If he is truly a soldier, he will not fear hardship. We must see what strength this human carries. The others nodded in agreement. They had trained since childhood to protect the throne, and they did not trust easily. Arun noticed the way their eyes measured him, as though testing him even before any trial began. The Empress did not give permission or denial. She only raised her hand slightly, a signal that meant she would allow events to unfold. Then she leaned back in her throne and closed her eyes, letting her daughters decide what came next. Two guards stepped forward and took Arun to a side chamber of the palace. There, he was given water to drink and herbs to place on his wounds. The walls were carved with long patterns that seemed to tell stories of past battles and victories. While he sat and drank, he could hear faint voices from the hall. The daughters were speaking among themselves, their words too soft to follow, but their tone was clear. They were curious about him, and they were not finished with him yet. When Arun returned to the courtyard, the daughters were waiting. The sky above had turned golden with the setting suns, and long shadows stretched across the palace ground. The eldest daughter stepped forward again. "Soldier of the stars," she said, her voice steady, "you stand in the house of the quiet Empress. If you wish to remain here, if you wish to prove you are more than a lost wanderer, you must show us your spirit. We will test you." Arun stood still, then gave a firm nod. He could not speak their language, but he knew the meaning of challenge. His life as a soldier had been filled with trials. Whatever they planned, he would face it. The Empress opened her eyes at that moment and looked upon him once more. No words left her lips, yet the hall seemed to bend around her silence. Her daughters were strong, her guards loyal, but her calm presence was what held them together. Arun felt it too. This woman ruled not with fear but with quiet strength. As the suns dipped lower and the air cooled, the tests were prepared. Arun stood ready, knowing that this meeting was no accident. His crash had brought him not only into the palace of the quiet Empress but into a new path he could not yet see. The courtyard of the palace was wide and open, with polished stone tiles that gleamed under the twin suns. Around its edges rose high walls carved with the images of ancient battles. Arun stood in the center, his boots heavy with dust, his shoulders still sore from the crash. Before him, 6 figures moved with perfect balance, their armor shining like silver flame. They were the daughters of the quiet Empress, each a warrior in her own right, each trained to protect both throne and people. The eldest daughter stepped forward first. She was tall, her hair bound tightly behind her head, her voice calm and sharp. "I am Myra," she said. "We have watched you enter our mother's hall as if fate guided you here. But fate alone is not enough. We must see if you hold true strength." Beside her, the second daughter folded her arms. Her name was Selin. Her gaze was firm, her body lean and swift like a hunter. "If he is weak, then he cannot remain here," she said. "If he is strong, then we may allow him to stand beside us." The third, Dara, had a quiet smile. She carried a bow in her hand and seemed thoughtful. "He may surprise us," she said. "Human or not, sometimes strength is not seen until the trial begins." The fourth was Rhea, with shoulders broad and arms that looked as if they could lift stone. Her armor was heavier than the others, marked with scars of past battles. "I want to test his endurance," she said, her voice like a low drum. The fifth, Lena, stepped lightly, her movements graceful even as she stood still. "Speed is the measure of survival," she said. "If he is too slow, he cannot protect anyone." The youngest, Sira, stood at the end of the line. Though younger, her eyes were sharp with fire. "Let him prove his spirit," she said. "If he cannot, then he is only a guest who will soon be forgotten." Arun listened as each sister spoke. Though their words were foreign, the tone was clear. He could read the challenge in their eyes, the test they planned for him. His body still ached from the crash, but his mind sharpened. He gave a small nod, showing he accepted. Myra, the eldest, raised her hand. Then let the first trial begin. The guards stepped aside, leaving space across the courtyard. Selin, the swift one, dashed forward with a sudden burst of speed. Her steps were light, her arms pumping, and in a blink she crossed the courtyard and back again. Then she pointed to Arun, her meaning simple. A race. Arun understood. He tightened the straps of his boots and moved to the line she had set. At her signal, they both ran. Selin moved like the wind, her feet barely touching the stone. Arun was slower, his body still heavy from injury, but he pushed harder. His breath came fast, his legs burned, yet he refused to stop. He reached the line far behind Selin, but he finished. Selin tilted her head, watching him. Though he had lost, he had not yielded. She gave the smallest nod of respect before stepping back. Next came Dara with her bow. She placed a row of targets across the far wall, each one marked with bright circles. With smooth motion she loosed 3 arrows, each striking the center. Then she handed the bow to Arun. He took it carefully. The weapon was heavier than the ones he knew, but the shape was familiar. He knocked an arrow and drew the string. His aim wavered from the strain in his arm, but he steadied himself. He let the arrow fly, and though it did not strike the center, it landed on the target. He fired 2 more, one closer, one wide. He was not a master, yet he had skill enough to show he understood the art. Dara smiled softly and nodded in approval. Then came Rhea. She lifted a stone block, heavy and rough, and held it high above her head. The muscles in her arms stood like cords, yet her expression stayed calm. She set it down and pointed to Arun. He stepped forward and placed his hands on the stone. It was heavier than he expected. His back ached as he lifted, but slowly, with grit in his teeth, he raised it to his chest. He could not push it above his head, but he did not drop it. He held it as long as he could before setting it down. Rhea gave a deep laugh, clapping her hands together. She liked his effort. Then Lena called him. She placed a series of small stones across the ground, spaced far apart. With light steps she leapt from one to another, never touching the tiles below. She landed with ease, then waved for him to try. Arun took a breath. His body was not trained for such balance, but he moved. He leapt from the first stone to the second, wobbled, then steadied. Step by step, he crossed, and though his landings were clumsy, he reached the end without falling. Lena's lips curved with approval. At last, Sira stood forward. She held no weapon, carried no weight, but her gaze locked onto his. She pointed to her chest, then to his, then pressed her hand against her heart. She wanted to test spirit. No race, no stone, no bow. Only courage. She stepped close and drew her short blade. She held it near his shoulder, then his chest, watching his eyes. Arun did not flinch. His body was tense, but he stood his ground. Sira studied him for a long moment, then lowered her blade and gave a smile. The sisters turned to their mother. The Empress had watched in silence through every test, her calm face never changing. Now she opened her eyes fully and met Arun's gaze. The daughters bowed their heads slightly, showing that each of them had seen something worth respect. He had not won every trial, but he had shown determination, skill, and above all, courage. For the first time since he had entered the palace, Arun felt the air shift. The guards no longer looked at him as a stranger. The daughters no longer looked at him as a trespasser. And the empress, though still silent, seemed to accept that he had passed the first step into their world. The courtyard was quiet after the trials ended. The guards had watched in silence, and now they whispered among themselves, speaking of the strange man from the stars who had faced the warrior daughters without fear. Arun stood with his chest rising and falling, his arms heavy from lifting stones and his legs sore from the race. Sweat clung to his brow, but his spirit did not break. The daughters gathered around their mother's throne. Myra, the eldest, spoke first. He is not as fast as Selen, nor as strong as Rhea, yet he does not quit. He is stubborn, and there is strength in that. Dara nodded. He is not perfect, but he learns quickly. His hands knew how to hold the bow, even if the weapon was not made for him. Rhea crossed her arms. He does not lift as I do, but he lifted more than I thought he could. His body bends but does not shatter. Selen tilted her head. He ran slower than me, but he did not stop. That deserves respect. Lena added softly, he crossed the stones without falling. Not with grace, but with balance. And Sira smiled. He did not move when my blade touched him. His courage is true. The Empress listened in silence. Her daughters had given their judgment, but her eyes still rested on Arun. She lifted her hand, and the guards struck their spears against the ground. A deeper test was about to begin. Myra stepped forward. "Soldier of the stars," she said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning, "the trials you faced were only games of skill. The real test is before you now. If you are to stay here, if you are to walk among us, you must show your strength when danger is real." Arun's brows tightened. He could not understand all her words, but he knew the meaning. His spirit sharpened. He was a soldier, and soldiers proved themselves in battle. The guards opened the far gates of the courtyard, and from within came the sound of growling. Chains rattled, and then a heavy creature stepped into the light. Its body was covered with dark scales, its eyes red, and its claws scraped against the stone floor. It was not wild, for the guards controlled its chains, but it was fierce enough to test even the strongest. The daughters stood aside, watching. One of them explained, pointing to the beast. "This creature has been trained for trials. If you can stand against it, then you are no ordinary man." Arun's breath slowed. He had faced enemies before, but never one such as this. He had no weapon, only his hands and the strength left in his body. Yet he did not step back. He moved into the center of the courtyard and raised his arms, ready to defend. The chains were released. The creature lunged forward with a roar, its claws striking at the ground where he had stood. Arun rolled to the side, dust spraying around him. He rose quickly and watched the beast circle. Its tail lashed, and its sharp teeth gleamed. The daughters leaned forward, their eyes sharp. The guards watched with tense faces, unsure if the human could survive. The beast struck again, faster this time. Arun jumped back, but its claws scraped his arm, leaving a shallow cut. Pain shot through him, yet he held his ground. He remembered his training. A soldier does not meet force with force when the enemy is stronger. A soldier uses speed, wit, and timing. Arun moved carefully now, circling with the beast. When it lunged again, he sidestepped and slammed his elbow into its side. The creature growled, stumbling for a moment. The daughters shouted softly among themselves, surprised at his courage. The beast spun and charged once more. Arun grabbed a fallen spear left near the wall. With both hands he planted it in the ground at an angle. When the beast struck, it pierced its own shoulder against the point. It roared in fury and pain, shaking the spear free, but the strike had slowed it. Arun pressed the advantage. He dashed forward, striking with the blunt end of the spear against its head. The creature staggered, its movements uneven. Arun's arms trembled from the force, but he did not stop. He struck again and again until the beast finally lowered itself to the stone, growling in defeat. Silence filled the courtyard. The guards looked at one another with wide eyes. The daughters stood together, their faces showing surprise and respect. Arun stepped back, his chest heaving, his grip tight around the broken spear. He had survived the test. Myra stepped forward. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of honor. "You have fought with courage and skill," she said. "You are not only a guest. You are a warrior." The other daughters nodded, each showing their own form of respect. Selen gave a quick smile, Rhea crossed her arms but looked pleased, Dara lowered her bow in quiet approval, Lena clapped softly, and Sira raised her chin with pride. The Empress opened her eyes fully. For a long moment she gazed at the soldier who had fallen from the stars. Then she raised her hand, and the hall filled with the sound of spears striking the stone floor in salute. Arun lowered the broken spear and bowed. His body ached, his arm bled, but his heart was steady. He had faced the test of strength and lived. In that moment, he was no longer only a stranger. He was part of something larger, a new path shaped by fate and courage. The suns had set, and the palace glowed with soft lanterns. The courtyard where Arun had faced the beast was now quiet. Servants cleaned the stones, guards returned to their posts, and the 6 daughters walked with their mother back toward the throne hall. Arun followed behind them, his body tired but his spirit alive. He had passed their trials, and though his wounds ached, he carried himself with pride. Inside the hall, food was set upon long tables. Dishes of fruits, roasted roots, and shining drinks filled the air with rich smells. Arun sat apart, watching the warrior daughters share their words. They spoke quickly in their language, sometimes glancing at him with sharp eyes, sometimes with quiet curiosity. Though he could not understand, he knew they were speaking of him. The Empress sat on her throne, calm as always. Her presence was like still water. She spoke little, yet her silence held more power than any long speech. Arun studied her, sensing the weight of her wisdom. She was not only a ruler but a guide to her people. The night seemed peaceful, yet beyond the palace walls danger gathered. In the dark forest, hidden from the lantern light, figures moved. They were warriors of a rival clan, enemies of the quiet empress who had long envied her rule. For weeks they had planned an attack, waiting for the right moment. Now they moved silently, their armor dark, their blades ready. The first sign of danger came as a faint crack of wood outside the walls. Arun heard it before the others. His soldiers' instincts sharpened, and his eyes turned toward the sound. The guards on the wall shouted suddenly, and then the attack began. Arrows lit with fire streaked through the sky, striking the palace roof. Shadows climbed the walls with ropes, their blades gleaming in the lantern light. The rival clan had come in numbers, more than the guards could easily hold back. The daughters leapt to their feet at once. Myra drew her sword, Selen rushed to the gates with her speed, Dara pulled her bow from her back, Rhea lifted a heavy spear, Lena prepared her twin blades, and Sira clenched her fists, ready to strike. The hall filled with the sound of steel, shouts, and running feet. Arun rose quickly. He had no weapon but the broken spear he had carried from the trial, yet his mind sharpened with old training. He scanned the hall, studying every corner. Soldiers of the rival clan broke through the gates, fighting with savage cries. The guards rushed to meet them, but they were outnumbered. The daughters moved like a storm, striking with precision. Myra led with calm strength, her blade sweeping down enemies. Selen moved faster than the eye could follow, cutting through their lines. Dara's arrows flew straight, striking targets before they reached the throne. Rhea pushed back attackers with heavy blows, while Lena danced across the stones, her blades flashing. Sira fought fiercely, her small size hidden by her fierce spirit. Still, the enemy pressed forward. More poured through the gates, and the hall shook with the clash of steel. Arun knew this was no simple raid. They had come for the Empress. He looked at her throne. The quiet Empress sat calm, her eyes closed as if listening to the flow of battle. Yet danger drew near her. Two attackers slipped past the guards, running straight for her seat. Arun's heart surged. Without thought, he rushed forward. He seized a fallen shield and raised it just as a blade struck down. Sparks flew as steel met metal. Arun shoved hard, knocking the attacker back, then swung the edge of the shield into his foe. The second rushed him, but Arun ducked low and struck with his shoulder, sending the warrior crashing to the ground. The daughters saw his act and shouted in unison. He was fighting beside them, not as a stranger but as one of their own. Myra called to him and tossed him a sword from a fallen guard. Arun caught it, the weight familiar in his hands. His body remembered every drill, every battle. Now he fought with the warrior daughters. His strikes were not as graceful, but they were clever. He used angles and timing, striking from the side when the enemy least expected. He used the shield to block and push, forcing his foes into each other's path. Where the daughters fought with power and speed, he fought with cunning. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The enemy realized this was no easy battle. One by one they fell, until only a few remained. The daughters drove them back to the gates, their blades shining. At last, the final cry echoed through the hall as the rival warriors fled into the forest. Silence returned, broken only by the heavy breaths of those who had fought. The lanterns flickered across broken weapons and fallen arrows. Guards began to clear the ground, carrying away the wounded. Arun lowered his sword, his chest heaving. His arms shook with exhaustion, yet he stood tall. The daughters gathered near, their faces showing respect. Myra spoke first. "You fought with us as if you were born among us. You are no longer only a guest. You are our ally." Selen added, "You are slower than me, but your mind is sharp. You turned their strength against them." Dara smiled. "Your aim with the sword was true." Rhea struck her fist against her chest. "You did not fall, and that is the measure of a warrior." Lena gave a soft laugh. "You move clumsily, but you win." And Sira's eyes shone with fire. "You stood between our mother and death. For that, you are one of us." The Empress opened her eyes at last. She looked upon the soldier and spoke a single word in her calm voice. Though Arun did not know the language, he understood its meaning. It was a word of acceptance. The battle was over, but his place among them was just beginning. The palace stood quiet after the battle. Smoke still rose from the roof where fire arrows had struck, and broken weapons lay scattered across the stone floor. Guards moved quickly, repairing the gates and carrying away the wounded. Yet within the great hall, there was calm. Arun sat on a bench near the wall, his sword resting at his side. His body ached from every strike he had given and taken, but his spirit was steady. He had fought beside the daughters of the quiet empress, and for the first time, he felt like he belonged to something greater than himself. The 6 warrior daughters gathered in the center of the hall. Their armor was marked with scratches, and their faces showed weariness, but their eyes held pride. Myra, the eldest, looked around at her sisters and then at Arun. She spoke softly in their language, and though he could not understand every word, her tone was clear. She was thanking him. Selin, always sharp in her movements, stepped closer. She placed her hand on his shoulder and gave a nod. Her eyes carried a spark of challenge, as if she was already planning another test for him. Arun gave a tired smile in return. The youngest, Sira, came forward as well. Her small frame still held the energy of battle. She said something quickly, her words fast and full of fire. Myra placed a hand on her shoulder to calm her, but Arun understood. The youngest daughter was declaring him part of their circle. The empress rose from her throne. Silence spread through the hall at once. Her steps were slow, but her presence filled the space. She looked at Arun, her eyes deep and calm. Then she lifted her hand and spoke a short phrase. One of the guards translated for him. You are no longer a stranger. The empress names you a friend of her house. Arun bowed deeply. It was the highest honor he could have imagined in this strange land. That night, after the wounded were cared for and the palace secured, a smaller feast was prepared. The tables were filled with warm bread, roasted meat, and sweet fruits. This was not a grand celebration, but a gathering of those who had stood together in battle. Arun sat with the 6 daughters. Though their language was still a barrier, they tried to teach him simple words. Myra pointed at bread and said its name slowly. Arun repeated, stumbling over the sounds, which made Lena laugh softly. Dara corrected him with patience, guiding his tongue to shape the word. Even Selin, who loved to test him, smiled when he finally managed to say it correctly. As the meal went on, Arun felt the walls between them grow thinner. They were warriors, proud and skilled, but also sisters who cared for one another. He saw how Araya passed the largest piece of food to Sira, and how Lena teased Selin until Myra gently calmed them both. They were not only fighters but a family bound by love and duty. After the feast, the daughters showed him the training grounds behind the palace. The moon shone over the wide stone yard, where weapons rested in stands and practice dummies waited. Selin challenged him first. She drew 2 short blades and pointed at him. Arun laughed quietly, though he was tired. Still, he accepted. They sparred beneath the moonlight. Selin moved with dazzling speed, her blades flashing like silver. Arun could not match her quickness, but he used his soldier's skill. He blocked with simple strength, stepped aside at the right moment, and turned her speed against her. When she rushed forward, he sidestepped and tapped her shoulder with the wooden training blade. The sisters cheered, some laughing, some clapping. Selin herself smiled, though she hid it quickly with a proud tilt of her head. You are clever, she admitted in her tongue, and though the words were broken to his ear, Arun understood. Next, Dara handed him a bow. She demonstrated how to draw it, her movements smooth and sure. Arun tried, but the bow was heavier than he expected. His first arrow fell short. Dara corrected his stance, lifting his elbow and guiding his aim. The second shot flew straighter, striking the dummy's shoulder. The daughters clapped again, and Arun laughed with them. One by one, he shared moments with each daughter. With Rhea, he tested strength, lifting heavy stones together. With Lena, he learned footwork, following her quick steps. With Sira, he practiced short bursts of combat, her energy making him sweat despite his fatigue. Myra, the eldest, simply watched, her calm gaze noting every move he made. By the time the night grew late, Arun was exhausted, but his heart was light. He felt bonds forming with each daughter, threads of trust woven through shared trial and laughter. When they returned to the hall, the Empress was waiting. She had not joined the training, but she had watched from the shadows. Her quiet eyes met his, and she spoke once more. The guard translated. You stood with my daughters. You shared food and training. In time, trust will grow deeper. But know this, our enemies will return. Tonight was only the first shadow. Arun nodded. He knew her words were true. The rival clan would not stop after one failed attack. More battles lay ahead, and greater dangers. Yet as he looked at the daughters around him, he felt no fear. He was no longer alone in this strange world. He had allies, perhaps even something more. The bond of trust had begun, and that bond was stronger than any blade. The night ended with the Empress returning to her chamber and the daughters to their quarters. Arun lay upon a simple bed prepared for him, staring at the high ceiling. His body ached, but his heart was steady.